Hey, what's up, guys? So, I got a quick reaction to Cris Carter's angry reaction about Kareem Hunt clearing waivers on First Things First this morning. Um, I'm going to go ahead and play some of the audio and then let you guys kind of see uh, or comment then on the specific takes that Cris is giving. All right, so let's go ahead and get over to the very first thing that I really have an issue with, which, if you need to look it up yourself, it's at like minute 123 mark of his little rant that he goes into.
Concerned about is because I don't know what his future is because the NFL and they don't have a plan. Typically in these instances, and what we've learned through domestic violence, like we've all been educated, but what have we learned to be able to help the players? Like what have we learned since the initial video of Ray Rice? Like what have we learned, Adrian Peterson? What have we learned? Like we haven't learned or changed a whole bunch. So for me, being in the NFL locker room and covering this sport for, man, almost the last 35 years, and I know I have to personally admit, not only my upbringing made me more apt for violence, but playing in this league made me a violent person.
All right, so right there, Cris Carter talks about, basically blaming football for helping making him a violent person. He also talks about not learning anything or nothing's changed since the Ray Rice video. The only part that he's right about is that as a society, as football fans, as, the sports media here, they've learned absolutely nothing. But it's not so much that they haven't learned, it's that they don't want to know, okay? That's the reality. They just don't want to know. Because what happened after the Ray Rice incident? What happened to Ray Rice? Well, that female that he punched in the face in that elevator, he's now married to that female. I think that's probably the biggest mistake he could make in his life. That's my personal opinion. I don't think she's that much smarter. But what we've learned is that many times when it comes to these domestic violence situations, the vast majority are reciprocal. It's not one person's an abuser and the other person is pure as the wind-driven snow. That's what we've learned. But the sports media doesn't want to tell you that. And they know it. The data's out there. They can look it up. They just don't want to report that because that's not what sells ad time to you. Okay? Next is his assertion that football makes you violent because it's a violent sport. He's going to go a little bit deeper into this. Let's take a listen. I think it's like 143, 148, something like that. Or excuse me, 243, 248. I'm going to try and bring that up.
That the game of football, a violent sport, we all admit that. But wouldn't you admit to be good at it, you'd have to be a violent person unless you were a kicker, a quarterback, or someone else? How can you not be either I can thrive in violence, or I can survive around violence, or I'm a violent person and not be successful in the league? I think that's the part that we are missing.
So there he goes in a little deeper into that rant. Here's the thing. That just doesn't pass the smell test. I need to remind people that these talking heads, they're not psychoanalysts. They don't have more background than you and I do. I'm not claiming to be a psychoanalyst, but I also don't have a national platform to get on top of and sit there and make declarations as if I know what I'm talking about. CC is in a position of prominence and authority, and as such, he really should be a little bit more cautious of what he's saying. The reality is that if what he said held water, that would mean that anybody who's involved in a violent, quote unquote, violent sport would be more apt for violence. So, or that's involved in a more, quote unquote, violent profession would be more apt to violence. So we should see the vast majority of people in prison for violence, the vast majority of arrests should be bouncers, should be police officers, should be soldiers, should be football players, should be kickboxers, boxers, hockey players. I mean, you name it, lacrosse players. wrestlers, jiu-jitsu practitioners, all these people, that should be comprise the majority of arrests for violent assaults. But that's not the case. And it's very dangerous when people that have a platform as large as Cris Carter's start to make declarations like that. There's some other issues I have with it, with what he has to say, but let's go ahead and listen to the next little clip here. So he's been monopolizing most of the time here. He really hasn't allowed anybody else to speak, but let's listen to what he has to say really quick.
And realize people in football are more apt for violence.
So there he goes again. This is so he went on for basically essentially 6-7 minutes talking about how football players being in the league makes you more apt to be a violent person. And I really think that in this instance they should have had somebody else on the panel that disagreed with that position, because just because that's Cris Carter's analytical belief doesn't, anecdotal belief doesn't mean that it's based on any analytics, right? That's not the same thing. And actually, back during the whole Ray Rice thing, somebody did put some numbers and crunch some numbers together, and what they actually found is that being an NFL football player, you're actually less apt to be involved in domestic violence, to be part of a violent encounter, to be accused of assault than the population at large. So, analytically speaking from the data, Cris Carter absolutely has no idea what he's talking about. Yet he's putting out a very, very dangerous narrative. Not only is it a dangerous narrative because it's ignorant, okay, and based on anecdotal evidence, his own life experience, but it's also dangerous because given the number of African American players in the league, this is like skating the borderline of kind of a racist comment. I mean, you can't sit here and tell me that that's not going to make implications about, who's part of the NFL, right? And who makes up primarily those players in the NFL. Who are the kickers and who are the quarterbacks that he just said, oh, they're not apt to be violent? Those are generally white players or non-African American players. So, it's kind of a dangerous, slippery slope he's going down. Now let's listen to what Nick Wright has to say, because I had some issue with what he had to say as well. So it's at 7:46 mark if you need to check it out yourself.
But we societally, we know we don't have a grasp on violence against women.
So right here, I completely disagree with Nick Wright. The problem is that we have a complete grasp of violence against women. And the whole problem is that's the only lens we look at it through, is violence against women. We don't look at it as domestic violence, meaning it's happening domestic in the domestic home, so there's two parties involved. Again, because the data is showing. It shows that these are generally mutually abusive relationships, meaning that the female is abusing the male as much as the other way around. And as long as we ignore that, it's going to be a problem. I'm sorry, but you cannot beat a dog, kick a dog, smack a dog around, tease the dog, and then be surprised when it bites you. Okay? It's just utterly ridiculous. So, let's see what else ridiculousness Nick Wright had to say. So he goes on, and this is at about the 10:05 mark. Again, if you have to listen to it for yourself.
True is a lot of guys are from rough backgrounds,
Sure.
surrounded by violence, and then you're playing a game that is
Compounded
inherently
by it.
violent.
Yeah.
Before we have but teach you how to when you have been taught on the football field to channel your rage one way, that once you get off the field to channel it a different way.
So there he goes, buying into the narrative that Cris Carter sold, right? Also, again, skating around a very sensitive subject. I mean, This is very close to a subversive kind of racist comment from both of these guys. And Cris Carter's black, just so you know if you didn't know that. But this is very, very close to a racist kind of comment. Um, I also find it problematic because, again, now not only are they taking away the responsibility, so to speak, from the women, but now they're taking the responsibility away from the player and the athlete, right? It's the game. It's the game. Now, I can tell you that vast majority of parents that want to put their kids into most sports is to channel their aggression, to get them to focus their physicalness in a more productive manner. So if you're telling me a person who gets to focus their physical energy on an outlet like football for 40 hours a week or more, okay, that they still need coaching on how to redirect their aggressive energies, I just don't buy into the narrative. Okay. And I don't know where they're going with this, but be prepared that this storyline is going to be hammering away into the rest of your sports media probably for the next week or so, unless something really big happens that has to change the story. All right, guys. Remember, be practical, be purposeful. Thanks for listening for the tidbit.